I've clicked onto the Global Tropical Review for August the 8th in the Central Pacific, 9th in the West Pacific 2023. As is always the case in these videos, the thoughts expressed here are mine alone, and when making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look towards your local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. We're going to start off. We've got three systems to talk about. We're going to start off quickly with Hurricane Dora here, south of the Hawaiian Islands now. And this system is continuing to move through the Central Pacific and will continue on its way towards the Western Pacific. In fact, this is forecast to enter the Western Pacific later this week. But this system has been doing very well. It has remained a powerful hurricane, has remained very small, and thankfully has remained far away from many land areas, including Hawaii. We're not having a Calvin situation where we're having a storm come towards our area. This storm has stayed very far south. In fact, it's moved southwest pretty much all its life, though now it's more westerly now. Now the system is struggling a little bit today compared to prior days. You can see that overall the forward motion is pretty quick here. The trade winds are fairly strong in this region, about 20 knots. That's roughly about 25 miles per hour, and that is pretty fast for a tropical cyclone. And I can show you where some of the shear is coming from. You can see that the surface flow about 20 knots here, but if you go up into the mid-levels, the mid-level flow is a bit weaker, with about at 500 or 450 millibars. We've actually got about 5 to 10 knot winds there, so there is a little bit of weaker winds up here in the mid-levels, which causes a little bit of shear. It's not very overwhelming. I mean, it's clearly not overwhelming as the storm is continuing to stay strong and might be even showing signs right now of getting, a little bit stronger. But overall, it's a steady major hurricane and will continue to remain away from land areas over the next several days. Now, as I mentioned, the system is going to be moving towards the Western Pacific, and as it does so, it is likely to remain a tropical cyclone, at least might even remain a hurricane. As it does so, the GFS does show it very weak, but the system is so small, the resolution of the GFS is not going to be able to catch it too much. Now, once it enters the Western Pacific, it's probably going to be weakening fairly significantly. There is a TUT here, that's a tropical upper tropospheric trough here, west of the system, and this will be bringing increased wind shear. And actually, a little interesting tidbit, this TUT is being at least partially influenced, it looks like, from what I can tell, by Typhoon Lan here near the, or sorry, it would be Typhoon at that point, Tropical Storm Lan, southeast of Japan. That's just another interesting note that I saw. But as the system comes to the Western Pacific, this flow is going to weaken it. It's not going to be an incredibly strong shear like Calvin had after it passed through the Hawaiian Islands, but it's still going to be significant, especially due to the stronger trades and such a differing direction of shear. So this is probably going to allow it to weaken, and most models have this opening up into a trough around 7 days, and it will probably get absorbed by some other system in the middle of the Pacific Ocean sometime this weekend or early next week. It's not a threat to land anywhere and never will be. It's going to be really known as that amazing storm that kept going as a major hurricane despite a lot of thoughts of it gradually weakening by now, less a major hurricane status by this point, but it's still holding steady. All right, now we're going to talk about the Western Pacific systems. We're still on Typhoon Khanun. You can see, or well, tropical storm officially. There is some differing thoughts on the exact intensity of this, but we have had some instruments come in and show that the winds are likely on the threshold of 60 to 65 knots, making the system just under or just over that typhoon line. But either way, there are significant impacts moving through Japan right now. That's really been the story the past week, but now more so mainland Japan. You can see lots of deep convection on the eastern and northern side of the storm. And this system will continue to move northwards and will likely bring some significant impacts to South Korea and North Korea before it gets absorbed into another trough. Here's the current pattern on the 500 millibar plot from the GFS. We've got a strong ridge here east of Japan, and this is pulling the system north, but there's also a trough here, not too strong, but it is putting a little bit of force as well to bring the storm north. Now, this trough is forecast to weaken, and then ridging is forecast to take shape north of the system. So this will probably slow down the system a little bit while it moves over South and North Korea. But eventually, another trough is forecast to come in, and most models actually have this trough absorbing whatever is left of Khanun at that point, and by then, storm will likely be gone for good, as we can say goodbye to it after the past couple of weeks of it just really sitting around here across the Western Pacific. But we're not done in the West Pacific, as you can probably clearly tell with the next system. But before I go on to land, this is the forecast coming from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, and you can see the expanse of the tropical storm force winds, with some stronger winds here, 50 knots near the center, and those will be more destructive winds. Those can bring more significant impacts, and those might persist on the way up to South Korea. All right, now moving on to land. This is Tropical Storm Lan here, and it does look pretty good. It has been developing pretty well here over the Western Pacific today. You can see that earlier today we had sort of a banding feature look to it, with a large band extending from the outside into the inner core, or really center of circulation at this point. But now we're starting to see maybe a more transition into more of a CDO, or central dense overcast pattern here, with perhaps maybe an indication of this inner core trying to build further. And I say further as we did get a microwave pass earlier today, showing that in the low levels we had some semblance of a developing inner core structure. And of course, over time, this system is likely to develop that well, as I meant to pull up the water vapor loop, as it looks amazing to look at right now. This system is in a fairly low shear environment, and a highly divergent one at that. You can see some outflow going towards the equator, and this upper low off towards the northeast is helping with some easterly outflow, and that's just an amazing presentation to watch. Now, there is some dry air around that. You can see it surrounding land, and that could potentially hold back the system if it does get entrained into the system. But right now, doesn't seem to be holding it back too much. Maybe some indication of perhaps some dry air here on the eastern side. We'll have to see whether or not that actually impacts the system too much at all. But this system is going to continue generally northwestwards over the next several days, and the track overall is pretty much going to be very slow. I'm going to go over the next 5 days here on the GFS ensemble mean. This is the ensemble mean position here, and you can see we have a ridge to the north of the system, but overall the steering flow is pretty weak. Here's a sounding from the GFS, and you can see overall the wind profiles throughout pretty much the entire troposphere are very light. Only about 5 knots here, 5 to 10 knots in most cases there, and you can see the actual steering here is only about 7 knots, not too fast. And really the 5-day forecast only has this system getting towards Japan. Here's 5 days on the GFS. Now there's naturally a bit of spread here, but the mean position has the system generally in the longitude region of Tokyo. This system is not going to move too much, so that does present the potential issue that the system could be able to intensify a little bit as the system moves west. Now, of course, there will still be that dry air, but overall conditions look fairly good. You can see general anticyclonic flow aloft here with ridging up north. There might be a little bit of displacement with this upper level ridge here. There might be some increased southerly shear acting upon the storm, but overall, the overall environment looks pretty favorable as the system comes towards the coastline. Now, naturally, if the system does stall, there might be some upwelling that takes place. There's not much oceanic heat content here, so the water, while their temperatures are warm, they're not too deep, so that could cause some weakening for the system like it did with Khanun, though I don't think the system is going to sit around nearly as long as Khanun did. Now, here's the GFS parent run at 7 days, and I'm going to show you this run and the CMC run, the Canadian model, for 7 days. And you can see here is the storm here. Here's land. It's already come through Japan at this point. As this ridge started to build east of the system and pulled it north. Alongside, there's this upper level low that allowed it to come north as well. But the CMC has a different idea on it, and this has been consistent for about a day or more. And you can see the differing locations here. The CMC actually has a system much further south, and what I can tell, from what I can tell at least, of what is happening here is the CMC is having this overall pattern with this ridge north of Japan and this trough east of Japan involves it a little bit differently. So on the GFS, you get this ridge building east of land, so that actually pulls the storm through Japan, and we get a typhoon landfall there. But the CMC does not do that with the ridge. It actually has this trough extending further west, which keeps the system further south, because if I go to the 200 millibar flow, this might give the best depiction of it. There is a little bit more northerly flow, northerly or northwesterly flow impinged upon the storm, trying to keep it away from Japan. Now, these are details that are just going to have to be worked out over the next couple of days, or not couple of days, several days. This is 7 days out, 7 days plus for the CMC scenario. But the key messages here for Japan is that we are expecting its system to come towards the region as a typhoon. You can see the Joint Typhoon Warning Center forecasts strengthening up to a Category 2 typhoon here as it approaches the region. Some weakening on approach to Japan. That can be caused by several factors, but overall, expecting a typhoon here near Japan, and this is a little bit of an interesting way for the storm to approach Japan. Typically, you'd have a storm coming out of the deep tropics and recurving, but this is a little bit of a different storm, and this may be a situation where we actually have a storm rather recurving and, potentially missing the land. We could actually be seeing the storm just come right into Japan. Or if this Canadian ensemble or approach takes shape, it could just sit off the coastline here, which, if it is big enough and close enough, which in this case it certainly looks like it may just be close enough, it could bring impacts to the coastline, and that could be prolonged impacts. And we already know that a lot of Japan has already dealt with that with Khanun. That's this pattern of just slow moving storms is continuing. Now that's all I've got for really all these systems. I'll have further updates later this week and towards this weekend as we go through the weekend with all these systems and how the pattern evolves. But stay safe in Japan and South and North Korea. And that's it for now. Thanks for watching.